Getting the live stream set up. It is taking just a moment.
All right. All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Oregon Environmental Restoration Council meeting for January 22nd, 2026. I'm pleased to welcome you all, and I'm going to turn it over to our meeting chairperson, Cheyenne Holliday, who is the council's vice chair. Cheyenne.
Thank you, Nicole. It is 9:03 a.m. on January 22nd, 2026. I would like to call the meeting to order. This meeting is being streamed live on OWEB's YouTube channel and being recorded. All materials for this and previous council meetings can be found on the Oregon Environmental Restoration Fund's website in the meeting information section. Viewers can click on relevant council meeting date and have access to the meeting materials. Council members, please remember to mute all devices to help cut out any additional background noises and use the raise hand feature. Our agenda today will start with a roll call. Once we have finished, we will go into consent items. Item 2 will be a program manager report. Item 3 will be public comment. Item 4, strategic priorities. Item 5 will be a Tribal Nation Natural Resource Fund. Item 6, the Agency Program Fund. Item 7, the Community Impact Fund. And we will finish with the next steps, reminders, and a wrap up. We should be done by 11 a.m. With that, we will now start roll call. As a reminder, council members, please turn on your camera and unmute your microphones. I'll pass it to you, Claire.
Good morning. I will start roll. Director Debbie Colbert.
Present.
Co-chair Michael Dembro.
Here.
Director Leah Feldon.
Present.
Representative Ken Helm.
Here.
Jeff Huntington is absent today. Dr. Molly Kyle.
Here.
Andre Orso.
Present.
Dr. L.I.E. Reyes Santos.
Present.
Co-chair Chuck Sams. I think that was a yes. The present, yes, I see you. Senator David Brock Smith.
I'm here.
Leslie Wu.
Here.
And last but not least, Vice Chair Cheyenne Holliday, who is chairing this meeting.
Here. Awesome. Thank you, Claire. Although we do not have Jeff Huntington today, he had an in-person commitment. We have the pleasure of having Anka Matika from the governor's office here as an invited guest. Anka is here to answer any questions and provide feedback as appropriate through the lens of the governor's office. Thank you for being here. Today, we are going to start with an icebreaker. The icebreaker is, if you had one free day in Oregon, where would you go and what would you do? I will first model and then pass it to a council member, and then we can popcorn around. I would first drive to Bend, Oregon, specifically to get chocolate chip pancakes, like very early in the morning. And then chocolate chip pancakes and hot chocolate with whipped cream, specifically. And then I would drive into Elk Lake, which is a little past Bend, Oregon. It is my favorite lake, like in Oregon. And I would just lay in a boat all day, jump in the water to swim, get back in the boat, take a nap, eat some ice cream, and just spend the entire day on the water. And I will pass it to Co-Chair Dembro.
Thank you, Cheyenne. Well, if I had a choice of going to anywhere in Oregon, I would have to say it would have to be somewhere in Coos or Curry County, because I know that would make my pal David Brock Smith very happy. But absent that, I will say I would embrace this cold, crisp weather, go up to Mount Hood and do some snowshoeing, assuming there's snow there. And I'll pass it on to my co-chair, Co-Chair Sams.
Thank you. Well, for me, it's pretty easy. I would head up to Esculpa Creek, which is not far from here, and start hiking into the headwaters of the creek, which is a feeder into the Umatilla River that goes into the Columbia, and spend the day just under the trees, building a fire somewhere up there, and being one with everything around me. That would be a perfect day for me. Thanks. I'm going to pass it on to Leah Belden.
Thank you, Chair Sams. Good morning, everyone. Let's see. Well, this is such a tough call. There's too many places. So I'm going to choose one that I don't know yet because it's an area I've been meaning to get to, but I have not spent time really in the Steens Mountains region of Oregon, and it's been on the list for way too long. So I'm admitting it here out in the open. Haven't been, need to go. If I had one free day, I would absolutely head there. Okay. I am going to pass it along to Leslie Wu.
Thanks. I'm going to copycat Co-Chair Denbrough a little bit and say go to the mountain, Mount Hood, ski bowl ideally, and we're in a universe that doesn't exist right now where there's lots and lots of fluffy powder, and my toddler has a great time and never cries or complains, and we ski all day together. I'll pass it off to Dr. Kyle.
So I'm an ocean girl at heart, so I would head to the coast. It doesn't matter where, catch it on a perfect day, walk along the beach, find a seafood shop, and call it a very happy day. I will switch it over to Representative Helm.
Thanks. Good morning, everybody. I was trying to think of somewhere I want to go in Oregon that I haven't been before, and I have been a lot of wonderful places. But first, the snow report. Don't, I hate to say it, but don't get your hopes up. Just up on Cooper's Spur outside of Parkdale earlier this week, we have 4 crusty inches of snow. Haven't had any in a couple of weeks. I looked at the forecast and it looks bleak for next week too. So sorry about that. I'm gonna invite Leah to meet in Fields for a milkshake while she's in the Steens because I want to go to the Trout Creek Mountains, which I've been wanting to go to for a long time, and those are a little bit further south and a little bit west of Fields.
Thank you, Representative. I love milkshakes.
And I will hand it off to Andre.
Thanks, Rep. Helm. This is a hard choice since we have a little bit of everything in Oregon. I would pick the coast around Yachats and Cape Perpetua. Spend the day around the tide pools with my son, and maybe go look for mushrooms in the forest and have some tea in the afternoon, and then some seafood at night. And that would be a perfect day for me in Oregon. And I'll pass it to Debbie.
Well, I guess I'll just pile on with for me, any day walking on a beach in Oregon is good for my soul. So, and since I have a 7-month-old puppy that absolutely loves water, I would spend the day at the beach throwing, sticks in the water so that she can do that continuously and never get tired. But yeah, just spending a day at the beach in Oregon is always a good day. And I will pass it off to Senator Brock Smith.
Well, good morning, everyone. I would, well, first off, I want to thank everyone for wanting to go to the beach. Everything is better at the beach. And the Oregon coast is a beautiful place. I think I'd go to Crater Lake. Especially with the solar flares that we are occurring and the northern lights. I just saw some pictures on social media recently of the Northern Lights over Crater Lake. Absolutely just stunning. So since I live at the beach, it's a beautiful place. Appreciate everyone. Bring your money and economic development to the Oregon coast. We love it in our small town coastal communities, but Crater Lake would be my place. And I've lost track of who is next and who to call on. So please, somebody jump in.
I'll jump in. There you go. Hi, everyone. This is hard. I love Oregon. There's so many beautiful places. I was like, the Wallowas, the coast, the south, the caves, so many rivers. But then I was, but this morning I was totally frozen in. Like I live in this like foothills of the Cascades, a bit north of Eugene, going towards Bend. And I was like, oh, if I had a free day, I would love to be here in the farm, but without having to do something. Actually, just like enjoying this fog. It's been beautiful. The fog in the morning, then it gets sunny a little bit, then the fog comes back, and then there's deer walking by, and the little foxes are doing their thing. It would be really nice to just be there without being like, oh, I have to clean the chicken coop and I have to just actually and run to a meeting. Just to actually be and enjoy the beauty of Kalapujilihi is like such a beautiful place. It's such a luxury to live here. It's just beautiful. So that's what I finally concluded. So thank you for the question. It was a hard one, and I think I'll pass it to. Do we pass it to our people as well, or is it just the council? Just following.
I think it is just the
Okay.
council today. So I
Thank
think
you.
every council member went. Thank you so much for that. That was hard and it was fun to get to know a piece of everybody. So thank you for sharing. Um, we will be moving into item 1, the consent items. The only item is the December 18th council meeting minutes. Are there any clarifying comments or questions for council members or edits to the meeting minutes? Nope. Okay, we need a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll move.
Right, Leslie Wu, motions. Who would like to second? And co-chair Sam's seconds. And the meeting minutes are approved. Or any further any further discussion? Okay, council members, please unmute your microphones for this vote. All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, now our meeting minutes are approved for the December 18th, 2025 meeting. Moving into item number 2, Nicole Manis will provide a program manager report. Council members, we will have the opportunity to ask Nicole questions after.
Thank you so much, Cheyenne. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and thank you again for your continued leadership and engagement as members of the Oregon Environmental Restoration Council. As part of my manager's report today, I'm going to provide you with updates on the membership status of the Oregon Environmental Restoration Council, a financial report on the Oregon Environmental Restoration Fund, an update on OEB's request to the Interim Joint Ways and Means Committee, Natural Resource Subcommittee, and program status and timelines. So I am really excited to announce that we now have a fully seated council. On January 1st, 2026, Governor Kotek approved the nomination of Jen Bildersee, who is the coordinator of Portland's Brownfield program. Jen unfortunately had a pre-existing conflict with today's meeting, but she will be joining us on March 18th for our next council meeting. And Jen is going to be joining Dr. Molly Kyle as the council's second public member with scientific expertise on the environmental or human health impacts of PCBs or other similar substances in the environment, as required by Section 5 of Senate Bill 1561. So Jen comes to us, as I said, from the city of Portland. She's worked for nearly 20 years to manage the environmental assessment and cleanup of more than 50 properties in the region and has helped to lay the groundwork for affordable housing, parks, gardens, small businesses, and nonprofits, essentially supporting the transformation of contaminated sites into community assets. She's also served as a program administrator, has experience in managing over $4 million in competitive federal funding, as well as facilitating projects that bridge remediation with equitable development. And she's going to be bringing a strong commitment to environmental justice in the urban landscape, with a focus on creating opportunity and access through land reuse. So staff will be onboarding Jen in early February, and I know that we're going to be really excited to have her expertise and energy as part of this group moving forward. And so that brings our public members of the council fully seated with their assigned terms. So that's a pretty big milestone for us, and really grateful for Jen's engagement and willingness to serve. So next, I want to provide an update on our financials. As a reminder, the management of money in the Oregon Environmental Restoration Fund is governed by our investment policy statement that was adopted by the Oregon Investment Council in October of last year. And that statement includes our investment objectives and the asset allocation recommendations and performance goals that were developed with the support of Treasury and the Investment Council. In terms of the status of the investments for the Oregon Environmental Restoration Fund dollars, as a reminder, in June of 2025, the settlement balance from the Monsanto settlement was transferred into the Oregon Environmental Restoration Fund. And then between June and December, it's been accruing interest at an average annualized rate of 4.25%. In November and December of 2025, Oregon State Treasury had been working to establish the accounts and also set up their administrative systems to be able to manage our portfolio. And they are currently in the process of placing our funds. So right now they are looking at investing 70% of the dollars into public equity assets and 30% into fixed income assets. And the investing process will likely be complete by March 31st of this year, although it will take about a year for the funds to be fully placed and kind of tweaked and rebalanced so that our investment objectives are aligned with the allocations for the portfolio as outlined in our investment policy statement. And as a reminder, the net settle amount and interest that totaled $607,625,000. I've been having to practice saying million and hundred thousands, was transferred into the Oregon Environmental Restoration Fund on June 9th. And between June 9th and December 31st of 2025, the fund earned just over $15.5 million. And in October, when the council determined the distribution policy, that resulted in a year one distribution of $30 million. So that amount will be deducted from the fund balance. And the net amount, which is about $593 million, is going to be invested moving forward in order to start generating that investment income that we will use. So I expect to see the deduction in our February or March statement. So I'll be providing a report on our fund balance at our March meeting. And I wanted to remind council that Oregon State Treasury is available anytime to come and make a presentation or answer technical questions that we might have of them. So if there is a desire or need to be able to ask State Treasury directly, or have a conversation, then please let staff know and we can coordinate a presentation at our next council meeting or any council meeting coming up. And I'm going to pause there to see if council members have any questions on the previous slide or this slide. Okay. Finally, I wanted to share that in order to kind of formalize our distribution for year one, the council, as represented by our co-chair Dembro and co-chair Sam, sent a letter, or will be sending a letter to OWEB's executive director, Sarah O'Brien, directing OWEB to transfer our year one distribution from the Oregon Environmental Restoration Fund to the 3 sub-funds per the allocations in Senate Bill 1561. So that was something that will happen every year once council has met and decided on the distribution for that year. We'll just send a letter to Director O'Brien, and that will initiate the process for the money moving from the main fund to the 3 sub-funds. All right, I wanted to update on a request that OWEB made to the Interim Joint Ways and Means Committee at the Natural Resource Subcommittee. And on January 13th, OWEB submitted a request to the Interim Joint Ways and Means Natural Resource Subcommittee for a permanent increase in OWEB's other funds spending authority of up to $35 million per biennium for both this biennium, the 25-27 biennium, and beyond. OWEB's Deputy Director, Stephanie Page, and our Fiscal Officer, Miriam Shar, and I prepared the request, and then Deputy Director Page and I made the presentation. So the amount of up to $35 million per biennium accounts for the current and future transfer amounts that will come from OWEB to the Tribal Nation Natural Resource Program Fund and the Community Impact Fund. We know the mechanisms by which those monies will move from OWEB to the sub-funds, and so we're able to ask for that increased spending authority. In terms of the State Agency Program Fund, we're still working on the exact mechanism by which that money will move. And so we may have to go back to the legislature for permission or spending authority for the Agency Program Fund. But depending on the mechanism, we might not need to. There were just 2 clarifying questions from the committee after the presentation request. The first was just to clarify where the distribution was coming from year one, whether it was interest or what the source of it was. So we clarified that for year one, we were taking the interest earned, but that moving forward, it would be a combination of investment income and interest income. And then the second question was just clarifying the timeline for it, whether it was for this fiscal year and next. And Deputy Director Page clarified that it was for this biennium and the next biennium. So our request was approved in session, and then it was passed on January 15th in the full Joint Ways and Means Committee. All right. So I'm going to provide you with a just quick overview on where we are in terms of the program development and our timelines, and then we're going to get into more detail in our individual agenda items. So we are, really staff has been working to kind of set up the foundation or framework for how each of these different components of the Oregon Environmental Restoration Program are going to operate. I'm going to be providing you with an update on the Tribal Nation Fund next, but that's moving ahead really well, and I'm excited to report on progress on that. And for the strategic priorities in the Agency Program Fund and the Community Impact Fund, we're really now heading into the engagement component of this work. And so we are starting to seek input and guidance from internal partners. And really now in this meeting, we're going to be asking for kind of advice and direction from council. But the next stage is really to start engaging with Oregonians as they are represented across a range of partners and interest groups and audiences, and start to hear from them about what their vision is, their needs are for the Oregon Environmental Restoration Fund. And as we move into this engagement piece, we really wanted to apply a consistent approach or model to how we do this work. So we're building a set of principles for how the program will run our engagement processes. We want the process to be inclusive and transparent. We want to be accountable to our commitments and to how we do this work. We want to think about meeting people where they are, so not asking people to do a lot of the work to come to us, but that we will come to them and try and make this as easy and accessible as possible. Want to make sure that we are valuing people's time, so we want to be clear about our intentions, be really come prepared, provide people with information, and make sure that they understand their role and where their information is going to be used in this process. And I think along those lines, be really clear about kind of the sideboards or the intent of this engagement. So being clear and transparent about how that input is going to be used to make decisions, and really what the decision on the table is, so that people come in with a really kind of clear understanding about what this work is about. In terms of our approach that we're applying to the strategic priorities, the agency program fund engagement, and the community impact and fund engagement, we are working to define our constituents. So who are the audiences we're going to be reaching out to? We want to be defining our engagement objectives and then making sure we're using the appropriate engagement mechanisms to reach them effectively and to gather information. We want to make sure the opportunities we create for engagement are meaningful and that people are able to come to these opportunities informed. So providing information, providing resources, either written or verbally, and just making sure that people kind of know what it is that they are talking about or being asked about before we actually structure a specific formal engagement opportunity. I think we want to, again, describe how the input is going to be used, or also describe how it was used in either deliberation or decision-making, part of that accountability and transparency piece. And then ensuring that we're bringing in expertise or third parties as needed to help us do our work. So staff is going to be doing a lot of this work. And then we recognize that there is a point where we need actual expertise in either community engagement or process design or facilitation. So we want to make sure that we are bringing that expertise when we need it. In terms of outcomes, I think we need to be thinking about some measurable outcomes for effective engagement. But we want to ensure that interested parties feel as though they really did have an opportunity to participate if they wanted to. We want to see a diversity of parties that have participated in information gathering and providing input, and ensure that participants feel heard and seen, see their voices and their values reflected in kind of how the program is designed. So this is a kind of overarching conceptual approach to how staff is going to be designing and then implementing all the engagement work that we'll be doing. We'll be doing kind of statewide engagement for the strategic priorities, and then a more focused engagement for the agency program fund and for the community impact and fund. But this sort of consistent, holistic approach to how we do engagement is going to be really important. And we're excited to hear council's feedback or any guidance that you have for us on our engagement approach. And before we turn to the specific business items or the agenda, I just wanted to share that staff has really been given a lot of thought to how we structure these conversations with council. Governor Kotek appointed you individually and collectively because of your expertise, your experience, and your wisdom to be able to move this work in the right direction on behalf of Oregonians. And staff really want to make sure that we're harnessing the power of having you all in this room at the same time to be thinking about how we do this work. So we recognize the first few meetings has been a lot of information, and we're bringing you kind of the details and trying to set the groundwork, do some level setting, and just making sure we're all on the same page about the scope of this work. And there's been a lot of detailed kind of delivery of this work, and that's kind of been necessary and important. But we realize that staff might need to be more strategic about kind of how we bring you this information so that you can really be operating at that sort of high 10,000 foot level and providing us with the strategic direction that staff need to make sure that we're heading in the right direction with this work. So, being able to get information from staff and then ask us or ask each other, Like, what are the risks or opportunities associated with some of these approaches or strategies? What haven't we thought of? Is this approach going to help us meet our goal of building programs that will effectively steward and invest these dollars to benefit Oregon and Oregonians? So we're going to be kind of working hard to try and synthesize and bring you information in a way that helps you track the details, but also really do that kind of strategic guidance to staff and to the program. And so we'll appreciate your feedback and your guidance to help us get to that point where you're really getting the information that you need to help us kind of tack and make strategic decisions and provide that guidance at that really kind of high 10,000-foot level. So with that, I'm going to pause and see if there's any reflections or comments or questions from council about our manager's report before we head into the next agenda item. Co-Chair
Madam
Dumper.
Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Nicole. Thanks for that presentation, which is great. Looking at the issue that you have just raised about outreach, so I'm wondering about our media relations strategy for this. I mean, I think that there has been some sort of broad advertisement of what we're doing here in the media. But it's been a few months, and I'm just wondering what we have planned going forward in terms of really letting the broad public know about this program, about this opportunity, and about the notion that we are really seeking their input.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think this is the kind of full seating of the council is a great opportunity to go back out with some information and stories about the council and its work and to kind of preview or share that we are starting this engagement. So I love that Anka came on screen. And I think that we were always sort of had that milestone in our heads about the next time to go back out with a celebratory milestone or actually some news about the full council being seated. So I think that's a great reminder that we need to be thinking about our kind of media profile and opportunities to engage at that level. And yeah, I'll call on Anka to see if you have anything specific to add.
Really wonderful timing, I think, for the conversation. We did some in initial interviews with members of the press. Nicole actually did those when we first hired our program fund manager to kind of start a little bit of re-uplifting the conversation around the Environmental Restoration Fund post Monsanto settlement conversations in the legislature, right? So folks kept it on their mind. And so to Nicole's point, I think we were waiting for another opportunity to help the actual council tell the story of the work happening. So great opportunity to work with the folks at the program fund to play some more stories.
Thank you, Anka. Other questions or reflections?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I was going to say something very similar to Michael. Is just we're all across the state, and just as we did in our opening, which I thought was a great icebreaker, I think it's a great opportunity for the governor's office to work with us, as Anka said, to kind of uplift this diverse group of folks who are here, and also to kind of get a little bit of input of what we see in the future. As I just mentioned in my own opening, Esculpa Creek, but I can think of at least a dozen more of these feeder tributaries, whether it's Wild Horse, Mackay Creek, or others, that have all been affected by agriculture in ways that are both positive, but also, as we also know, that that are negative in what was sprayed over the years. And there's been great work done by multiple agencies across the state around protecting the riparian area and trying to make sure that it functions in accordance with being a filter. But there are so many more projects to do all across the state, especially those in agriculture areas. And so if we could figure out how we can highlight the membership here of this council, and for us to point out where we see projects that could be done with these funding, that also will ensure that we're finding out who isn't currently coming to our table or who might be missing from the table as you continue to work to bring in and be that inclusivity. Because so many times I know that I've had to sit there and see, I know the familiar faces that are coming to the table and have to ask who really isn't at our table that could be here or should be here to be able to help us tackle these large environmental issues for the state. So, but thank you for your very thoughtfulness and the staff's very thoughtful approach.
Thank you, Co-Chair Sams. Co-Chair Dembro, did you have another question?
Yeah, I'll pop back in
Great.
with another thought. And that is, I do hope that at this point, the conversation really is about, priorities and principles, with the outreach. I will say that, the risk here, of course, is that, everyone who has a project, however distantly related to the subject of this fund, who might see this as a way to make their project pencil out, we may hear from them. And, I do know I've shared this with a couple of you that we probably will be seeing legislation in the short session where agencies will be directed to apply for funds from from this. I've been very clear with people that they can apply, but that doesn't guarantee anything. But I think that really what we need from people is thoughts about what kinds of potential partnerships could happen, where the priorities are in terms of what the state really needs. And if these conversations could be really directed that way, I think it really would be valuable at this point. They're all going to have an opportunity to actually apply when that time comes. But right now we're trying to get this thing set up and figure out what should our filters be when the actual proposals come in.
Thank you, Co-Chair Dembro. Yeah, one thing that we'll likely talk about in our agenda item presentations is the desire to get council in front of some of these constituents. I think having a conversation in Oregon about specifically the strategic priorities is going to be a really valuable and powerful experience, and we're be able to point to those kinds of conversations as a way to demonstrate that council is listening and really incorporating that information and feedback into their deliberation and decision-making process. So we're excited to think about how to structure those kinds of engagements or interface with specific constituents across the state and council. So we'll look forward to hearing a little bit more about that in our presentation, staff presentations. All right. Oh, Director Felden.
Thanks, Nicole. I'll be brief at the risk of being duplicative of the co-chairs in their initial comments, but I've been thinking throughout this also about the opportunities to really do education and outreach about this fund and all the possibilities. And, I think of folks out there who are very used to reach out from government for something like a rulemaking or, a specific site cleanup, and just how specific those things are, and not a lot of room for creativity. Whereas I feel like this is to some degree the opposite. There's a lot of really important criteria, but we really want to get the word out so that people who have knowledge and concern about contaminated areas that haven't fit neatly into a box before, can be discussed and can be considered. And so, yeah, again, I don't want to take up too much time. I don't want to be duplicative, but I just think that outreach is really important. And maybe, Nicole and Rachel and Anka, like, you could collaborate with certainly my communications folks, or maybe there are some others who would have some, bandwidth to collaborate on some creative ways to get some of this out in a different way than we normally would outreach for people to just come in and join a advisory committee or something. I think there's opportunities for some storytelling and just to really help people across the state understand this isn't a one-time thing. This is now an ongoing part of how we, manage contaminated sites in our state, which is really exciting. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Director Feldon. That this idea of being excited about it and storytelling, I think, is a real opportunity for us. And I know that as staff is starting to do some of our internal outreach and conversations with state agencies, we're starting to see that enthusiasm bubble up. So we're really excited to launch the engagement work. And I think there's a huge opportunity here to kind of build community, tell a good story. And I'm excited to see council's role in kind of providing that leadership and helping to craft that story. So thank you. Co-Chair Dembro and then Dr. Kyle.
Yeah, actually, I was going to direct a question to Doctors Kyle and Reyes Santos. So maybe Dr. Kyle can respond, when she follows me. But I'm just wondering if there's a way to involve our academic community in these issues. I mean, I'm sure that you have colleagues around the state and the different institutions who are interested in this issue, concerned with this issue, have expertise and awareness of what is possible, looking at what has been achieved in other states or, et cetera, et cetera. If there is a way to bring in our university professionals here.
Oh, great question. I'll answer that and then ask my question though. It's yes, I think there are actually some incredible resources that we have at universities. I'm more familiar with the ones at Oregon State University, but directly applicable to the toxic chemical aspect that is kind of, in my mind, a North Star for this settlement. We have the Superfund Research Center down here, which is all about trying to mitigate toxic hazardous waste sites. We also have environmental molecular toxicology and then a lot of expertise in the environmental health field as well. So I think there could be, and I'm sure people would be happy to be tapped. So yeah, I would happily volunteer colleagues, academic colleagues. My question though kind of dovetails with actually Denbrough and Feldon's comments earlier, which is I think it is important to have guide rails or guardrails perhaps between this fund and standard mechanisms for mitigating hazardous waste. I would hate to see this fund get gobbled up so quickly with work that is actually already part of regulatory processes and funded through other mechanisms, as much as everybody would benefit from a bolus of resources like this. I think it's going to be very important to make sure that those guardrails exist, and I'm curious how other people are thinking about that.
I want to just provide a little bit of information that could respond to that question, and then we'll go to Dr. Reyes Santos' question. The legislation states that the funds need to supplement existing work and not supplant, and so we are really leaning on that phrase and that interpretation to ensure that this work funds new initiatives or creates the opportunity for new work to be done. And then secondly, we are waiting on an interpretation from Department of Justice on the kind of eligibility criteria that are stated in the settlement terms. So I am already getting emails weekly about, I have this project, will the OERF fund it? Or is this project going to be eligible under the Tribal Nation Fund, Agency Program Fund? And so recognizing that, I am not an authority to answer that question, and I think council will need some support on interpreting exactly what kinds of activities, what types of projects are eligible according to the settlement. So I think that information will also help us with that messaging and communication. But I think it's a really important point. The total amount of money on paper looks like a large amount, and when you look at the cost of environmental remediation and restoration work, those costs can be significant, and we want to be kind of thoughtful about aligning need and opportunity with this fund. So I appreciate that comment, and we are carrying that ethos and that awareness forward in our messaging and in our work. So I appreciate that, and we'll rely and lean on council to carry that messaging forward as well. Dr. Reyes Santos.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole, and thank you for that question. Yeah, I think from my experience doing similar work at a smaller scale, I would say that engaging the academic community would be like really key, actually, and especially to address the pieces that Chuck Sams was sharing as well, co-share, in the sense that what I've learned working on the Oregon Water Futures Collaborative is that we actually did an engagement meeting that was only with researchers that were doing work in the area. And it was really amazing because then they were able to help us think about what would be priorities, what are communities we should be engaging with, because they're doing the work with communities all across the state. And so I think that there's a lot of potential to bring people from across all the different academic institutions around the state, which is really nice. We have all these regional colleges that are really amazing and powerful and connected with communities that rarely get access to this kind of resource and space. And so we will be able to then, I think engaging them specifically would be a great idea. So I'm glad this came up right now. I wasn't thinking about it in this way for this particular project. And the other thing we learned with the Water Equity Fund is that when we were distributing money that was also given by through legislation out to University of Oregon, connecting with our colleagues at PSU, OSU, U of Oregon, who were doing work on water and sharing with them the call, they were able to then share with specific communities around the state and do that kind of outreach. And because they're trusted partners, because they've done technical assistance before, it allowed for those communities to feel like they could apply for the fund. And then also ended up bringing faculty and researchers to provide technical assistance to some of the projects. So I think there's some wonderful synergy, but especially thinking about how some academics can be that trusted partner that brings people on board that can be really productive for the engagement process as well. I'll keep thinking about it, but thank you so much for the question. I think there's something really productive there.
Yeah, thank you. And when we talk about the Community Impact Fund engagement, you will see a little bit of that thinking in terms of those nodes and networks and using trusted partners to help us build trust with those communities. So I want to thank LAE for her guidance so far in helping us to think about community engagement. And I'll turn it to Senator Brock-Smith.
Morning. Thank you. I just wanted to echo what Molly was talking about. It's critically important. I brought those issues up in our last meeting as well. And so she asked what we all were thinking, Molly, and I agree with you. We have an excellent opportunity and a diversification of projects across the state. We need to be mindful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. Any other reflections or comments? I just want to say thank you. This is exactly the kind of conversation we're hoping to have, and just really appreciate the sort of challenges and daylighting of opportunities and need that you're providing here. This is really, really valuable. All right, I am going to move us into our next agenda items. And I will say that the most nerve-wracking part of my job is operating this PowerPoint slide over Zoom. So I feel like I'm doing okay so far. All right, I wanted to provide an update on the Tribal Nation Natural Resource Program Fund. And I am really excited to report that as part of the thank you. Oh, sorry. Claire just reminded me that we need to pause for a public comment. So I'm going to turn it back over to Chair Holiday.
Yep.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. That was a great conversation. Thank you, Nicole, for the presentation. We'll really quickly move into item 3, which is public comment. Thank you to those who submitted a written comment for this meeting. I believe we had 2 individuals, so thank you. Submitted public comment can be found on the website, OregonERF.org. Under today's meeting date. We did not have anyone register to provide a verbal comment for today's meeting. But as a reminder, there is dedicated time for each meeting to hear verbal public comment, and please reach out to Claire Linnaeus for any questions. And with that, I'm actually going to pass it to the program coordinator, Rachel, to go over our strategic priorities.
Yeah, thank you, Co-Chair Holiday. I will get this presentation up. So good morning. My name is Rachel Thompson. I am the program coordinator for the Oregon Environmental Restoration Program, and I will be providing council with an update on the strategic priorities for the Oregon Environmental Restoration Fund. And this is agenda item 4. So under this agenda item, I will provide council with a recap from the December 2025 council meeting, where council was presented with a framework for how the strategic priorities could be used in council funding decisions, and also discuss the level that the priorities would operate in for funding decisions. I will then ask council about any reflections from that conversation and ask council for input on the pending engagement that will be used to gather input on the priorities, and then present on the staff proposed engagement methodology and outlining next steps for staff and council in determining and identifying the priorities. So at the December 2025 meeting, staff presented some high-level principles and themes about the priorities that resulted from one-on-one discussions that council members and staff had. So I just want to provide a recap of those themes and then also share some of the resulting discussion that was had at that meeting by council. So for the principles about what the fund should support, council shared common interest in the fund supporting multiple co-benefits. So thinking about things like human health and economic interests in addition to supporting ecological needs. Council also shared a desire that the fund should support strategic partnerships between public, private, and nonprofit organizations. And council also shared that fund investments should be leveraged with other funding sources to really maximize the investments and outcomes. Also some discussion about the durability of the fund, given the long-term nature of the fund and the long-term needs that exist. Some of the themes that council shared about the priorities and how council sees the scope, scale, and role of the priorities in council funding decisions include a desire to keep the priorities broad to allow for greater adaptability and variety in investments, but also the need to have some targeted objectives that will really help to address priority issues and create impact in the lives of Oregonians. Council supports prioritizing larger and more focused investments over multiple small investments that might be less targeted. Council also shared a desire to have priorities that are geographic, ecologic, and time-bound, and that will consider both long-term and short-term impacts. There was acknowledgement that the Monsanto settlement agreement must really be and remain the North Star for this fund, and that the priorities need to address the intents and purposes in the settlement agreement. And then there was also shared consensus among council that fund investments create measurable impact for Oregonians, and that Oregonians really see a return on investments through how the council is directing resources and prioritizing funding. And I see Director Colbert has her hand up. Would you like to address something now, Director Colbert, or? are you okay to wait until the end of the slide?
Just wanted to clarify. So Rachel, you're kind of sharing some of what's been discussed. I just want to be clear, like from my perspective, I don't know that I would characterize this as a consensus. It's
Okay.
a recap. So
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot more conversation to be had around those principles. So
Thank you, Director Colbert. I think that's a great point, and apologies for maybe overstating the consensus aspect of this. This isn't a recap. This is the principles and themes were what was presented at the last council meeting, and I will discuss kind of the discussion that was had by individual council members as well. So thanks for catching that, and agreed. This is the first conversation of, or well, maybe the second conversation of many more as it relates to the strategic priorities. So let me get the presentation back up. So after sharing some of those themes and principles, council engaged in some really great, meaningful discussion that I think provided staff with some additional input on some of the early visioning that council has on the strategic priorities. So I summarized some of those discussion points here. There was recommendation to really consider identifying the gaps in current funding to understand where opportunities may exist to address unmet needs that align with the settlement agreement. And related to that, recommendations to utilize existing statewide strategies and frameworks to really help guide investments by council. There's already been a significant amount of work done in statewide conservation and natural resource strategic planning and frameworks. And so utilizing these resources will help council be strategic with fund investments and better prioritize needs. In sharing out a conceptual framework for how the priorities could be used in council funding decisions, there were recommendations to utilize separate program evaluation criteria. So having a separate set of criteria for the Community Impact Fund and a separate set for the Agency Program Fund that could be used as additional tools for helping to focus investments. And in doing so, the criteria would be able to focus more on the specifics of that program funding while allowing the priorities to stay more broad. Related to this, there was discussion around the priorities being realistic but aspirational and serving as a North Star for council and funding decisions. There was caution against having priorities that are too constricting or that might require frequent revisions or changes to stay useful or relevant in council decisions. Council also discussed the importance of storytelling for communicating outcomes and impacts of investments. Acknowledgement that while quantitative data is important and needs to be a part of this as well, council shared that communication and storytelling is also important and needed, especially when considering addressing longer term impacts that may not see quantitatively measurable short-term outcomes through data. And then council also had a discussion on considering strategic priorities that would address prevention in addition to restoration as a means to meaningfully address PCBs and other contaminants. So while the December meeting was, again, not intended to identify the first set of priorities, I think council did make some really meaningful progress on examining the scope, scale, and role that the priorities could play, and also providing staff with some great strategic direction on things to consider. So the statewide engagement will assist council in gathering further input to help with the identification of the priorities. And so staff are really anticipating beginning this engagement work and incorporating council's recommendations and input in that process. So with that, I will just pause and ask if council has any reflections from the December strategic priority discussions or the recap that I just shared. Does this still ring true? Are there things missing? Are there things that would be helpful to incorporate into the engagement process as staff begin that to gather input from Oregonians on the first set of priorities? And I will pause screen share again and just see if there's any comments or reflections that council would like to share, knowing that there was already a pretty great conversation following Nicole's presentation, but just want to provide one more opportunity in case there's reflections. Director Colbert.
Just kind of thinking about those principles and, you know, at least for kind of the discussion that we've been having with staff, council staff, and others, for us as an agency, being grounded in the settlement is a principle, is the starting place for anything that the council would consider funding. Not a theme, but a fundamental principle for the work.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that is an important distinction to make. So I think that's probably something that, yeah, we could move over into the principles as really a guiding star, because you're right. I mean, I think that's what the comments reflected in that discussion, was that it needs to be that North Star. So thank you for that. Representative Helm.
Yeah, thanks. And I think that was a good overview, and it captured a lot of what I was thinking when we had our interviews and discussions. And I can't remember quite if we touched on this particular nuance of how do we integrate with other work that's already going on. But I thought I'd mention it, and it might be a good thing for us to think about in terms of education of the council. I could certainly use better education on other existing strategic plans, and ones that come to mind immediately to me are, and Co-Chair Sams can help us with that, is the habitat plan of the Northwest Power and Conservation Council. That is a large, broad strategic plan that we should be pretty well acquainted with, I think. Another, and Director Colbert can help us with this, is the Strategic Wildlife Action Plan. Those big plans have already been rolling along, for some of them for many years and decades. And we'll learn a lot from them, and maybe they will present us with the information about gaps that we're already interested in. Thanks.
Thank you, Representative Helm. Yeah, I think we can absolutely put together maybe like a 101 or, an inventory of sorts of plans that could be considered as part of this work. So thank you for those comments. Dr. Reyes Santos.
I think I have a question. I wasn't there, and even, we have the minutes, but it's not quite the same in December. I'm wondering if, as part of like what you presented, thinking about like a broad representation of multiple actors, or stakeholders, right? Like of communities, if there's any way to kind of capture that in these priorities and so on and so forth, like the beautiful diagram. Because I'm one concern I have, and I think I've heard this before in the council, so just what I'm gonna name it again, is that the funding doesn't just go to the usual suspects, the people who are always like, that are ready to like submit public comments, that are ready to like, who already know about this and are like waiting, like, oh, let's just like have access to this. But like that we actually have somewhere in there something that requires us to not forget, to always keep seeking who are we missing. And so just wanna, I don't know how to name that right now, but I feel like that should be somewhere in there, that would be key. And the other thing is a question of accessibility, and like, is the application accessible in multiple ways, in multiple formats? Like one of the conversations when, I think some of the conversations I had with OWIP staff was about sometimes, like, when you work in rural areas, people need to hear about things differently. Like, online is not gonna work. Maybe they need a mailing, maybe they need it on radio. Are we thinking about also that? Like what mediums are we even using to distribute information about the fund, but also to create accessible applications for the fund? And we have models out there for how that could be done really well. I just want to make sure that somehow we can address that or name it as we set up this process and this framework.
Thank you so much for those comments. Those are incredibly helpful input for staff as we start thinking about the engagement. And I will present in a moment on some of the methodology that staff are thinking through. I don't know that we have an approach that's lined up yet. So I think we'll definitely be wanting to utilize council's input and expertise in making sure that we're designing a really thoughtful and intentional engagement process that gets at those points that you made. So thank you so much for that. Co-Chair Sams.
And I want to thank Representative Helm for bringing that up. The Northwest Power and Conservation Council, where I sit as one of Oregon's council members, we've just published the draft Fish and Wildlife Program for review, and several of my colleagues on here helped put information forward on behalf of the state on that. During that process, we've already held our first public comment period or public presentation. Another one will be coming up in Bend next month, and we of course invite everybody from the state of Oregon public to weigh in on the Fish and Wildlife Program. Recognizing the Fish and Wildlife Program also covers our friends up in Washington, Idaho, and Western Montana. It is well over $300 million in fish and wildlife programming that will come from BPA to support the state's tribes and local communities in mitigating for the dams in the Pacific Northwest. But it is really concentrated on those issues surrounding the dams and BPA's operations, which is to say it has some geographical limitations to the fund overall compared to this fund, which has covers the entire state of Oregon. So, of course, we welcome that, and thank you, Representative Helm, for bringing that up.
Thank you, Co-Chair Sams. Co-Chair Denbrough.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I really appreciate this conversation, and thanks, Rep. Helm, for bringing up or reminding us of the need to look at the plans that are out there, and as we're generating our own. And I haven't discussed this with Co-Chair Sams or Vice Chair Holliday, but I think or staff, but I think it would be useful for us to get presentations from the different entities that have such overlapping plans. And obviously we've mentioned the natural resource people, but I think Andre, I'm looking at you. I think in the public health area as well, with where things are tangential to this work, and I think there are many others there. So getting staff to do a sort of to reconnoiter the lay of the land, what's out there, and then to have some targeted presentations from representatives of those entities that where there can be some Q&A with council members, I think would be really helpful for us. So thank you.
Thank you, Co-Chair Denbrough. That is incredibly helpful direction for staff. So I think that's something we can absolutely work towards for upcoming council meetings. Thank you. Director Colbert.
This has been very helpful, kind of thinking about kind of where we get information to inform investments. One of the things that I'm struggling with is we're having a broad conversation, and for me, there are different elements that apply for the community fund versus the state agency fund, and I'm really struggling with the lumping right now. So this is a problem for me as a council member. When I think about communities and the barriers and trying to diversify those that can get funding, we know we have examples of the insurance requirements that are put on entities that get, so when we issue a grant to a small community group, the first problem they're going to have is with our state insurance requirements. It's not like, I guess there's a lot of broad conversation happening, and I guess like I am not a patient person. I also know that, for me, I have some urgency about the funding hitting the ground. We've lost like 1 billion birds, globally. Oregon's got the worst trends of like the nation in terms of our some of our species. So I guess for me to have these conversations around priorities and how to make decisions, I personally have got, for me, it has to get bucketized based on the funding, because I really feel like we're dealing with different issues. So when we talk about giving money to folks that may not have gotten money, to me, that is like a conversation about our community funds and like how do we broaden the reach? How do we put it in venues that can reach a diverse audience of folks? I'm really struggling with the lumping, and I'm curious how we're going to move this conversation forward on priorities without starting to get a little bit more clear about those differences.
Thank you, Director Colbert. I think that is those are important conversations, and I think that I want to acknowledge that these are kind of tough conversations because this is so big picture nebulous at this point, and there's not a whole lot to grasp onto. And so I really appreciate the need and the desire, and I'm sure you're not alone in this. I'm sure other council members feel similarly in wanting to start feeling like there's something concrete to hold on to as we start working towards the identification of the priorities. I think that, and I'll get back to the presentation here in a moment, but I think there's a couple things that could happen here. One of the things that we talked about at the December meeting was having a separate set of evaluation criteria for the different programs that would allow the direction of funding to be more tailored to that specific program, which could potentially allow for the priorities to be the same between both programs. But I think there's a lot of unknowns still in that. And part of what the engagement process will help determine is, looking at the different audiences and who would be beneficiaries of those funds, and knowing, understanding from those inputs where thoughts are about how the priorities should be identified and determined within the different fund programs. So I think there's a lot that will come out in the engagement that will give us a little bit firmer ground to stand on, and for council to really be able to look at some information and input that might help with further identification. So I'll pause there. Co-Chair Dembro, I see your hand up.
Dembro, could I just kind of respond? And I guess, part of it is that we're mixing a lot of principles versus mechanics of giving out money, right? So, on the one hand, we might want, as a mechanical approach, we may want to do something like, longer term investments, capacity building, so we can build up some of these organizations. Some of the money we may want to do small, little bits of money, don't have huge kind of application, but see, a lot, and that gets at the audiences and the beneficiaries, and those are kind of mechanical things that I worry we're mixing into a lot of the principal things. And so just again, so thank you for listening. Sorry, Co-Chair Dembro.
No, I really appreciate your bringing up this issue, Debbie. I think, what we're doing right now is brainstorming. And so a lot is being put out there. I personally would propose that, the priorities are the same irrespective of the fund. I mean, what we're hoping to achieve. The different funds, will be addressing those needs differently. The implementation of the work will be different according to the different funds, but the priorities of what we're trying to achieve here, for the good of the state and Oregonians, and everything that's Oregon, is I would propose is the same irrespective of the fund, but there will be different, just different avenues, different priorities within the priorities probably, but those will have to be sorted out in the future. I think it's really important right now to get everything out there, including concerns. And so, I do appreciate your bringing this up. This will be something that is going to have to be addressed. So what is the difference between the community fund and the agency fund? There will be definitely areas of overlap. And maybe in some cases, the work will be being done by the same people. But that's, those are all things I think for us to work out. And so I really appreciate that we're affording the time for this kind of discussion, in these meetings, because it's really going to be important.
Thank you, Coach Dunbrow. Agreed. These are super important conversations to have, and really pleased that council is willing to have them in this public forum. So I think that these are important conversations that we will continue to build off of in the coming months, and as we continue to work with council on the engagement piece. I will go ahead and get back to, for the sake of time, our presentation. So again, really appreciate the discussion. Really appreciate council's direction and input on this work. Do you want to just now provide a brief status update on where we are in the process design for the priorities? So at the December meeting, staff shared this table with council to outline the staff process for strategic priority identification. Happy to report we've made it to January. So we are ready to start beginning the statewide engagement to help gather input on the priorities. And more on the engagement methodology in a moment, but staff do anticipate the engagement work to wrap up in March, and staff would then provide council with a synthesis of findings at the March council meeting, at which time we would be asking for additional guidance and input from council at that meeting. Staff will also report out this information publicly before bringing this back to council in May or June for the hopeful identification and determination of the priorities. But, as conversation reflected just now, and just knowing how kind of challenging this topic is, these are estimated timelines. There should be, if there is need to extend this work to ensure that there's adequate time to gather that input and make decisions, staff will adjust the timelines as necessary and in consultation with council, but also recognizing that there is some urgency to making meaningful progress on this work. So staff expect to begin engagement for the priorities in the coming weeks. The goal for this engagement process will be to inform council's deliberation and the eventual determination of the first set of the priorities for the fund. This will be a statewide process that runs approximately from February to June of 2026, which is when we hope council will be ready to make their determination of the priorities. We will be engaging almost everybody in this process. So federal and state agencies, technical experts, local governments, legislators, tribes, nonprofit groups, community-based organizations, the public. And we'll use a number of different methods to gather input depending on the audience and the outcome needed. So, given the range of audiences that will be engaged in this work, staff do expect to achieve different outcomes and utilize different methods that will best serve the participants that are being engaged. As Nicole mentioned, staff really want to get members of council involved in some of these engagement processes. We think it would be really powerful for Oregonians to see this council deeply engaged in conversation about the priorities for these funds, and believe it would be meaningful for council members to be hearing directly from constituents about what the needs and priorities around the state are. So for next steps, again, staff anticipate beginning statewide engagement to begin gathering input on the identification of the priorities, and we'll be reporting those outcomes to council at the March council meeting. Staff will be asking council to provide direction on the engagement input to help further develop, refine, and identify priorities for the fund. So with that, I will just pause and see if there are any questions, and otherwise I will return. I see Co-Chair Holliday.
Thank you for the presentation. I don't think that there's a question in this. It's just a thought. I understand and am on board for the urgency of identifying our priorities and getting closer to getting money out the door. And also looking at our timeline, February is in like 9 days. And there, to Co-Chair Dembrow's points, I think almost an hour ago, we still haven't had much like press relations or community outreach. I don't think individuals across the state know that opportunity for engagement is coming. And then zooming out into this larger context of the world of we have legislative short sessions starting, and a lot of folks who would be engaged in that are probably also parallel to folks who we want to provide input on these priorities, along with like the larger context of what's happening within this world. And so I'm so glad Anka is here today. But I really just want to push that I think like information about the engagement process starting needs to happen very soon and aggressively so folks know to engage.
Thank you. That's a great point. And yeah, staff will be working closely with the governor's office to help push out some of this buzz around the fund and make sure that it's accessible information for folks. So thank you. And Anka.
Yeah, I just wonder too, in the spirit of collaboration, and I am just subbing in for Jeff, so correct me where I'm misspeaking here. If it's worth pulling together a subcommittee of folks from council who are interested in being up to date and or involved in some kind of a communication subgroup where we talk through folks who might be interested in being validators for press, more comfortable talking with press, comfortable helping advise on final outreach materials or ideas, that would be super helpful. Just you all have networks. So would love to help bring those conversations together. I'll coordinate with Nicole and Rachel, and you guys will have my email address, and then we can figure out how to proceed if that's something of interest.
Thank you, Anka. That's a great suggestion and something staff can follow up with council. So I think with that, I will pass it to Nicole, who is going to give an update on agenda item 5, the Tribal Nations Fund.
Great. Thank you so much, Rachel. So I am pleased to be able to report that based on the distribution that council made for our year 1, we will be sharing or sending $833,333 to each federally recognized tribe in Oregon through the Tribal Nation Natural Resource Fund. I'm also happy to share that staff have completed a draft set of rules, and those are currently in review with Department of Justice. Their timeline for getting us back those rules is hopefully before the end of January. And so we are hoping to send council and staff at our federally recognized tribes a copy of those rules for their review and comment. And we will specify kind of the turnaround time. We're proposing a 45-day turnaround time for comment and review. And I'm in communication with each tribe individually to determine what is an appropriate timeline for their review internally. So this feels like a really great milestone to be crossing, and we are working expeditiously to make this happen. We're also starting to engage with tribes to talk about the reporting requirements. So the rules will say basically that there will be reporting requirements. The statute says that those reporting requirements must be determined in consultation with tribes. So we are starting to work on that. And the reporting requirements themselves will be housed within the individual intergovernmental agreements that will be signed with OWEB as the fund administrator and each tribe. So we're using the development of the intergovernmental agreement process to work through those reporting requirements. Those reporting requirements have to be approved by council, so we'll be bringing you a package of recommendations at the next council meeting. But this feels like really substantive progress, and it's been a great pleasure to be able to communicate with our tribal partners and let them know that this money is on the way. So in terms of our timelines, hoping to begin rulemaking if possible in March, if everyone is able to move through the review process relatively quickly. And then IGAs signed and payments transferred sometime late spring. So that is our working timeline, and I'm feeling relatively confident that we can hit those milestones. So I will pause for any questions or clarifications. All right, hearing none, I will move us back to Rachel to discuss the agency program fund.
Sorry about that. I had to unmute. Thank you, Nicole. So good morning again. For the record, Rachel Thompson, Program Coordinator for the Oregon Environmental Restoration Program. And this agenda item is to provide updates on the agency program fund. So today I will cover the legislative context for the agency program fund in Senate Bill 1561. Ask council to participate in a visioning exercise about the fund, which will hopefully not be too painful for folks, and then provide council with a status update on the program build out and milestones before wrapping up with next steps on the program and outlining a preview for the March council meeting. So apologies for the text block here, but Section 6 of Senate Bill 1561 describes the role of council in establishing the agency program fund. So council is tasked with establishing through rulemaking procedures and criteria for approving allocations to state agencies that have a nexus with the projects and purposes described in the Monsanto settlement agreement. These allocations must be for purposes that are consistent with the settlement agreement and the strategic priorities set by council. So there is alignment here between the strategic priorities and how funding decisions are made for the program by council. Allocations from the agency program fund cannot replace other funding sources, but may be used to supplement existing programs or projects or to create new funding opportunities for programs or projects. The administrative rules for the program at a minimum need to include procedures for soliciting and reviewing applications from state agencies, criteria for projects or purposes funded by allocations, including desired outcomes, and reporting requirements for state agencies that receive an allocation. So I'll share more on the anticipated rulemaking in a later slide, but just a note that council will be asked to provide strategic direction to staff prior to and during rulemaking to make sure that program rules are aligning with council's visioning of the program and fund uses. Also just a note that this is not a competitive grant program. This is a transfer program that will provide eligible state agencies with funding to support strategic work that is aligned with the purposes of the settlement agreement. So some of the language in the bill could be potentially implied to think that this is a granting program, but that is not the intention with the agency program fund, that agencies would be in competition for the funding. Oh, and also just a quick note as a reminder that the agency program fund receives 50% of the disbursement from the main Oregon Environmental Restoration Fund, with the Tribal Nation and Community Impact Fund both receiving 25% respectively. So this was already shared in Nicole's manager update, but want to share this again here for some expected program milestones with council. And so this shows the timeline for the agency program fund build out along with the other two subfunds and with the strategic priority determination. Engagement for the state agency program fund is expected to begin imminently in winter of 2026 and done in parallel with the engagement for the strategic priorities. I'll describe the staff proposed engagement and program design components in greater detail in a moment, but I just want to illustrate that given the role that priorities will play in determining allocations for the agency program fund, rulemaking will not conclude until after council has determined the first set of strategic priorities. Staff has heard lots of feedback from agencies that knowing what that first set of priorities will be will really help aid in the shaping of input provided for program design and for providing feedback on the administrative rules. So rulemaking will not be finalized until council has identified the first set of priorities. I'd also like to highlight that the first funding allocation is estimated to occur in late 2026, which is a target that is subject to change. And this may not be aligned with when allocations occur in future biennia. Currently, staff are working really diligently with agency partners to determine program cycle timing for both this current biennium and for future biennia. Since staff are still working on the program build out and rulemaking has not started, this current biennium is likely to look pretty different than what the program solicitation and award timing will look like in future biennia. And so the timing of this distribution will really be determined as staff work through the program design and rulemaking processes. So we'll be keeping council informed as we work through this. So before continuing the presentation with status updates on the program, as promised, staff want to open up an opportunity for council's discussion, some early visioning for the agency program fund, and ask about what sorts of outcomes council would like to see, given, one, the long-term nature of this funding, and then two, that 50% of the total funding is dedicated to the agency program fund. So it's a significant portion of the fund, and has potential to have, significant impact for Oregonians. And while the strategic priorities, the engagement, and the rulemaking processes will also really help to inform the build out of the program, council has a major role in shaping this fund. So thinking at a high level, staff would like to open up for discussion a few questions. One, what is council's vision for how the agency program fund can be used to meet this current moment and opportunity? And two, what are the high level, kind of 30,000 feet outcomes that implementation of the agency program fund could or should achieve for Oregon? So I will pause and see if there are any reflections or comments that council would like to share. Co-Chair Holliday.
Thank you for that presentation. The discussion point from the strategic priorities presentation that said realistic but aspirational, I think is really important here. I'm so glad that and excited to have the agency directors and agency representatives on this council. And I think we're in this moment where we can create something new, create a precedent for a fund like this and money that has different rules. And so I'm in this, my brain is in this space of how can we be creative or really think through something new, but also make sense for agencies, because I know you have different rules and a different game to play. But like my brain is like, how do we not necessarily push the boundaries, but expand the way we think about an agency program fund?
Thank you, Co-Chair Holliday. Great feedback. Other thoughts from council? Andre.
Thanks, thanks, Rachel. I guess I have a question for clarification when we're discussing and coming up with agency priorities. My understanding that there is a little bit of inconsistency between the language in the settlement versus the language in the bill regarding nexus and impacts to human health. And I think that the settlement agreement provides some sort of limitations on funding that could go towards addressing impacts on human health, where the legislation directly says, well, there should be this nexus between human health and provide funding to help disproportionately impacted communities. When I'm thinking about priorities, I'm definitely thinking of like buckets. So we have areas where, well, it's more concentrated on, wildlife or purely environmental matters, and then areas where we would have more impacts to public health or human health, but still aligning with the, limitations and structures of the settlement. So I guess, long-winded question is, could you clarify some of the limitations and on that human health nexus that are in the settlement?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And I haven't presented on this yet, but what we are still working with DOJ on is to help us provide some of those parameters for eligible uses of the funds and ineligible uses of the funds. So I don't have a response for that question at this time, but we are working with DOJ to help provide some clarity on that, because it is a question, I think, that is slightly different between the settlement agreement and the Senate bill. So we are working with DOJ. We should have a response imminently is the hope. And then we can share that out with certainly with council and also with the agency partners and with the larger beneficiaries of the funds. So thank you for that question.
Thanks, Rachel. And I would say that I'm definitely willing to be creative and think of, funding impact that could have positive impacts on human health, but still stay within the kind of the structure and limitations of the settlement.
Thank you. Yes, that'll be important. Co-Chair Dendro.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. And thanks, Andre, for raising that point. I do look forward to getting DOJ's thoughts on this. I will say that when 1561 was drafted, we did, deliberately imagine that, we're looking at impacts on public health as part of it. And, our legislative council felt that that was acceptable to put into the bill, irrespective of the, what might or might not have been in the Monsanto settlement. I think that one of the questions, I think we touched on this last time, was the sort of mix in the agency fund of programs and projects, right? And I think this will continue to be something for us to be thinking about. I don't think, I do, to the best of my memory, as we were doing this legislation, we were thinking that there would be this kind of mix where the agency might not only be creating programs, new programs, badly needed programs within their agency, but also working with other entities to, to do grants or, to oversee projects in partnerships with other organizations or cities, counties, et cetera. And so I think there's a lot for us to talk about here.
Thank you, Co-Chair Jumbo. Yes, I think, those are conversations that, yes, I think we had started having in December and will continue to have. And I think, again, the DOJ opinion on this will really help to inform the sorts of eligibility for both activities and project types. And so that's kind of a key piece of information that we are eagerly waiting to share and find out for ourselves. So thank you for that. And thank you for the legislative kind of context setting too. That's very helpful. Other comments or thoughts from council? Representative Palm?
Yeah, thanks. I noticed that our agency heads aren't quick to chime in here. And that reminds me of another aspect of this tension between the holders of money or funding and those that need it to spend for agency purposes under the missions that each agency is tasked with. And I'll offer an observation that won't strike you as novel, but maybe it's a reminder. Agencies want to be given money to do their job and not have a lot of strings attached, especially from legislators. And, we're not exactly legislators, but we will probably want some strings attached or at least some high-level oversight. So I think that's a challenge. And as I was thinking about how to respond to your very good set of questions here, is I can't tease out, in just a few minutes, all the different needs of the natural resource agencies that I'm pretty well familiar with, both from a budget point and their agency mission. The stuff that their ongoing work consists of, I'm probably gonna again want more information about, and I think there will be some areas to create short lists of uh, uses for this fund that are entirely consistent with ongoing work of the agencies. And that you'll have a couple of other lists. And as you go down, as Andre was, I think, hinting or implying, it gets less and less clear. And so I think maybe our job in the near term will be a little bit of a sorting process of those activities, which we're very comfortable with, and then moving on to others where we're uncertain, need more information, et cetera.
Thank you so much. And Anka, not to put you on the spot, but I did see you got on camera, so I wasn't sure if you had anything to add from a governor's office perspective on that.
No, just demonstrating active listening. But thank you for that. And I think this is honestly a topic that I think a communications subcommittee, a communications education subcommittee might be really helpful in tackling what level of information we need, not only from council for council members about how agencies are implementing programs, how just the real tangible, what does it look like and what would you be funding and what does that mean for Oregonians, but also for community members, right? I think like the increasing the level of knowledge and awareness about what happens on the ground in the field in these agencies is something that I think could be a really nice use of that. Sorry about the subcommittee's time. I have an orange cat who decides every day at 10 a.m. that it's time to wreak havoc, so he'll pop up. But so really just great conversation to be a part of and happy to help coordinate. I have the pleasure of working with our Natural Resource Agency communicators and legislative coordinators. So I know this is something that's really top of mind for them.
Thank you, Anka. Dr. Kyle?
Yeah, so this is something that I've actually been thinking about quite a bit. And I think part of the guidance that I hope we can at least discuss, if not embrace, is the intention of what this funding is, which is about the toxicological principles. So to get a little sciencey, this is because there was toxic chemicals released. And if there's a route of exposure to either an organism, an animal, or a human, that becomes the opportunity for intervention that really would speak to how to use this money. Some of that falls within agencies' purviews, and I think there's some creative aspects that we can think about for either new programs or new opportunities that would really focus on breaking that route of exposure. Because if you can break the route of exposure, the risk from the toxic chemical reduces dramatically, and think about who is the most vulnerable within that across the state. So I know that part of it is that's how I'm trained and that's how I think about these types of problems. But I think it also actually helps as a useful sorting principle for all of the different things that we're going to have to consider and discuss as a program, which is really keep that fundamental environmental toxicology risk paradigm as a North Star. So those are just my thoughts on this, because I do think it's going to get complicated, and I think some of this exists, and we really do have an incredible opportunity to think more creatively about how we can reduce the risk of toxic chemicals in Oregon.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's really helpful and a good thing for us as staff to keep in mind and to keep bringing to council's attention as we work through this. So thank you so much. Director Colbert.
One thought that occurs to me is, we have the statute, we have the settlement agreements, and maybe we need to spend some time as a council kind of just like going through like when it says projects purposes related to environmental assessment, restoration, improvement and protection of wildlife habitat or natural resources, like what are examples of work like that, and kind of reground ourselves in some of that. And I do think it will be, in order for us to really have a good sense of what is how to set this plate for eligibility, I think we do need to get that DOJ advice, because I mean, for me, that's kind of a big fork in the road. We know that when they testified on the bill, they said that it couldn't be used for projects not related to the environment. So, but I feel like we need to kind of all get that straight, just so we know as a council.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, agreed. Staff are very keen to get that information as well. And we've been having conversations with DOJ. It sounds like they're getting close with a decision and a determination on that. So and thank you for the suggestion to like be working with council in terms of thinking through some of those eligibility pieces and going through some of the bill language to help address that. I think that's a great suggestion. I know Director Feldon also has a comment, but Nicole, I see you came on camera and I wasn't sure if you had something in response.
I just want to clarify that when we get the finding from DOJ, we will invite DOJ to this meeting so that we can have council members have direct access to the interpretation, obviously in advance, and then have an opportunity to talk or ask questions of our counsel with an S as needed. So we'll create that opportunity for you well in advance or after you have received the written opinion.
Thank you, Nicole. Director Feldon?
Thanks, Rachel. This has been a really good discussion, and I just kind of wanted to emphasize a couple things I've heard and then talk about the agency piece a little bit. And I appreciate Representative Helm putting out there things that are easy for us to comment on and things that aren't. And that's so true. Dr. Kyle has now mentioned two things that to me are kind of North Stars that apply across the board, despite the differences in the community and the agency fund. So, one of those being this concept of supplement, not supplant. And I think that's really important. And the agencies are going to be able to help a lot, I think, in that realm in terms of, what is work out there that needs to be managed through a responsible party, through the laws that exist for environmental restoration through a responsible party, versus what is the work out there that isn't being managed and can't be managed by a responsible party, and what are the reasons for that, so that this council fully feels comfortable in understanding, how we differentiate those. The other piece that she just talked about was this toxicology piece, and where are we seeing, the most exposure from toxics that are covered under this bill, and that's a place that we need to be focusing. So just to add to keeping those two concepts, I think in our forefront is the fact that when we start to look at how we can start funding important work, the good news is that the agencies can bring forward examples of work that isn't currently getting attention, right? Current environmental problems, public health issues, environmental issues that are not being addressed, and for which there are funding mechanisms for. And so I think that's the good news in terms of what could, we be doing in the earlier stages with this fund, while we continue what's going to have to be ongoing and iterative public engagement on issues we don't know about or might need more, creative long-term funding. Director Colbert mentioned capacity building, right? Like some of those are going to take more time. And we already have things in front of us that we know about that could, be advantageous to look at for quicker funding. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Feldman. Yeah, that's great framing and a great, I think, kind of refiguring of some of the comments that have been made in today's great discussion. And so I think I'll get back to the presentation in a moment where we talk about engagement, planned engagement for this work. But absolutely, I think agencies are going to be a key piece to making sure that we're capturing some of the knowns and the unknowns in terms of what work is needed to be funded. So thank you for that. Director Colbert, I don't know if your hand is a new hand or if that was an old one. Okay. Andre.
Thanks, Rachel. Could you please flash those two questions that you had for the council again.
So yeah, just they're, kind of high level questions. Intentionally so, what is council's vision for how the agency fund can be used to meet this current moment and the opportunity that we find ourselves with the fund? And then just thinking about high level outcomes or kinds of outcomes that could be achieved with the agency program fund.
Thanks. I mean, I think like the first question is going to really depend on a lot on the DOJ opinion, and for the second question, just being, listening to Dr. Kyle and Director Feldon, I think, obviously environmental restoration is a high level outcome that we'd all like to see on some level. And then I was thinking like environmental justice as well as a high level outcome. And we have like wonderful tools at the state, environmental justice mapping tool and environmental justice council that could help guide us and like whether it's setting high level priorities or particular projects to be funded. I think that's a tool that we could use to help answer the second question.
Thank you. Yeah, I absolutely. The bill does require that there is consultation with the Environmental Justice Council, which staff are actively doing. And there are just some tremendous state resources that we have to lean on in this work. And so I think that's a great observation. So I will, looks like Dr. Reyes Santos has a comment.
I think just I keep hearing about, I'm sitting with the question of the multiple funds and how we can like create something that applies across the board. And then the other thing that keeps like kind of haunting me is the piece around it cannot replace existing funding. It has to supplant. And I know that we're waiting for DOJ, but do we have a sense of do we have any sense already of like what that means concretely, just to kind of have clarity on my end?
That's a great question. I don't believe we have legal clarity on what that means. Although I would invite Nicole Manis to speak up if she has something else to offer there. Okay, yeah. So no, but I think this is where, again, DOJ's opinion will really help to set some of those sideboards, and they are important sideboards, admittedly. And so, some of this visioning, admittedly, is hard to do without knowing some of the answers to that. But we also feel it's important to provide council with an opportunity to be thinking big picture. As of now, we don't know what the constraints might be. And so thinking through, if we live in that world, in that space, what could be possible here? And so that's some of the intention behind this, but very valid points that we're, there are some big sideboards that are still yet unknown. Co-Chair Dembro?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Rachel. And just in response to Dr. Reyes Santos's question about supplement versus supplant, to be honest, and my former colleagues can weigh in on this if they want to, but I think that largely this is a direction to the legislature that we don't want to see agency budgets cut and then backfilled with potential proceeds from this fund. That's not what this fund is about. It's the principle here is what's often called maintenance of effort. The agencies are expected to maintain their current efforts, and this is in addition to that. So that was kind of the purpose really behind this. And I will say, I do appreciate your first comment about co-benefits. I mean, I think, and we talked about this last time in December, as one of our principles. We would like to see projects that, when possible, span multiple arenas. They're good for, the physical environment, the animal environment, and the human environment. And I think, I think of a lot of the work that DEQ does, is often spanning all of those worlds as they're trying to eliminate pollution, which has harmful effects. Thanks.
Thank you, Co-Chair Denbrough. Co-Chair Holiday.
Yes, thank you. Although I love this conversation and I know that we have so much to talk about, I'm just looking at the clock and may put up on the table to move to wrap up in next steps. Nicole, I don't know if you want to give a brief update on the Community Impact Fund or if you'd like to move that to the top of the next meeting.
I will propose that we share a brief written staff report that gets shared with the council so that they are able to track our progress on the Community Impact Fund. We are designing our community engagement process and looking to bring on expert guidance to help us with designing the process and also helping to manage some of our engagement work itself. So we wanted to put on the record that this is a priority for staff. We are moving ahead with identifying partners, implementing the network node that Dr. Reyes Santos alluded to earlier. So just wanted to underscore that we are sort of diving into this work. It's a priority, and we want to start that relationship building, information sharing, and making sure that the communities know that this opportunity is in front of us, and we start having the relationships and trust to be able to go out and do that kind of engagement work. And I want to thank Dr. Reyes Santos and Vice Chair Holiday in their guidance and help in helping us to shape that strategy. So Vice Chair Holiday, I will send it over to you to help wrap us up on time.
Thank you, Nicole. So as a reminder, our next council meeting is Thursday, March 18th. It is in-person hybrid option in Salem in the land boardroom at the State Lands Building, which is the same location as our October meeting. This meeting will be also accessible with Zoom webinar and streamed on OWeb's YouTube channel. And this will be our first meeting with our new council member, Jen Bildrees. And as we close today, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the significance of what we're building together. These conversations are not easy. We are at the very beginning, and I know progress can be slow, and there's all of these questions. But what we're doing is laying the foundation. And to quote the National Cheerleading Association, hashtag the work is worth it. The work is worth the care, the patience, and the persistence that each of us are bringing. And as we move forward, we're going to need to begin grappling more deeply with what we envision for this funds and the outcomes and the values that guide it, and really leaning into our North Star. When we reconvene in March, a lot will be in motion. The community engagement will be underway. We'll be hearing what folks across the state and potentially at the legislature think about this fund and the expectations they have for it. So it will be a full meeting in every sense of the word, but excited to potentially or to do it in person. And yes, see you then. Thank you.
Thank you.